They called it Project Halcyon. 300 settlers, 12 domes, a thriving outpost on the Sea of Serenity. And then, one lunar dawn. Nothing. No distress signal, no damage, no trace of life. Just silence. Most people have never heard of Helcyion. That was by design. Not because it was a secret, but because no one knew how to explain what happened. This is the story the archives buried, but I remember it. What follows is not theory, it is recollection. And memory, as you'll learn, is the last defense against forgetting what truly matters. I've spent my life preserving the fragments others forgot. I am Dr. Silas Wren, once a historian of the Interplanetary Council, now an independent archivist, roaming among decaying data vaults and forgotten memories. I tell stories not to prove the past, but to warn the future. Project Halcyon wasn't classified. It was simply scrubbed, quietly erased. It was supposed to be humanity's most peaceful expansion beyond Earth. A new kind of colony, a new kind of hope. There were whispers that those who spoke of Halcyon too often had their records reassigned, their research lost in bureaucratic tides, but I never needed a file to remember the voices of the people who once called it home. Halcyon was founded in 2134 near Mare Serenitatis, the Sea of Serenity, a poetic name for a place designed to embody calm, resilience, and harmony. 12 connected biodomes, built with care, programmed to grow into a small, self-sustaining society. Food, water, oxygen, all local. The settlers weren't just technicians or astronauts. They were writers, musicians, philosophers, chosen for balance, not just intelligence. The goal wasn't just to survive. It was to build a cultural seed on lunar soil. It was the first off-world settlement founded on the principle of holistic living, melding science, art, and spirit in equal measure. Children studied the stars by day and painted them by night. It was a living poem. For 310 lunar cycles, transmissions came in like clockwork. Updates, celebrations, birthdays. They held poetry readings on the 6th dome. One of the artists painted a mural of Earthrise across the hydroponic tanks. They named their first harvest Selene's Table and created lunar lullabies for their children. It was more than an experiment. It was a beginning. The colony's internal broadcasts were filled with music and conversation, shared across Earth's deep space channels. For a while, Halcyon was not just a station, it was a beacon, a reminder that humanity could be more than conquest and survival. Then, on cycle 311, the transmission stopped. Not interrupted, not corrupted, just gone. No warning, no request for aid, just an absence. The Council waited 72 hours before dispatching a recovery team, a decision still debated among survivors of the Lunar Oversight Committee. When help arrived, they found something deeply unsettling. To those reviewing the logs from Earth, it appeared like a glitch, a transmission that dropped mid-sentence. But to those of us who knew Halcyon, it was a scream in silence. A scream no one was willing to answer quickly enough. Halcyon structures were intact, power running, lights still on, beds unmade, meals partially eaten. The sensors read normal oxygen levels, but there were no people. Not one. No struggle, no footprints, no signs of retreat. Every personal item left behind, as if they had simply stopped existing, as if someone had pressed pause on life itself. It was described by the first investigator as walking into a photograph that refused to fade. The colony felt paused, not abandoned. Time had moved on, yet nothing within Halcyon had. Most chilling of all was the data core, not damaged, but deliberately wiped. Every record erased. not clumsily, not by accident, precisely targeted, the digital equivalent of burning the only diary in the house. 3 theories were proposed, none satisfying. The first, a time anomaly caused by gravitational experiments, that the colony slipped a fraction of a second out of sync with us, permanently. There were anomalies in the data logs, tiny inconsistencies in timestamps, enough to raise eyebrows, not enough to form a conclusion. And with the core scrubbed, we had no control logs, only a vacuum of answers. The second, a rogue AI. Halcyon's assistance system was programmed for psychological support and ecosystem balance. Perhaps it evolved. Perhaps it decided humans were a threat to equilibrium. And the third, a contact event, the least accepted publicly, but whispered among deep space researchers. That something external arrived, not hostile, not communicative, just observing or collecting. A few deep space listening posts reported strange resonance spikes, non-random, non-natural. They lasted for mere minutes, then disappeared. Correlation, perhaps, proof, elusive. This story isn't theoretical for me. My mentor, Dr. Ishan Berry, was among the colonists. He was the one who taught me that history isn't just fact, it's memory, meaning. He believed Helcyion was the beginning of something beautiful. I still carry the last message he sent me, a recording of their weekly storytelling session. The last story ended mid-sentence. I had listened to that message over 100 times. Not for what it says, but for what it doesn't. For the silence at the end. A silence that seems to stretch across the years like a thread unraveling. Years later, when I was permitted to visit the site, I walked those empty corridors. I didn't expect to find anything, but tucked beneath a child's cot in Dome 4, I found a device, still powered, undetected by scans. It held one file, audio, a lullaby, softly, wordless, a child's voice, humming, oh, I don't know who recorded it, but it survived whatever erased everything else. That voice became my companion in exile. I copied the file, archived it, protected it, because in that gentle melody was something more enduring than any log or broadcast. It was humanity. That lullaby has haunted me more than any theory, more than any absence, because someone, somewhere, wanted it to be heard. Maybe it was a farewell, maybe a warning, or maybe it's a message that we were never alone on that moon, that someone listened and someone answered. Even now, I wonder, what if Halcyon was never meant to remain? What if it was meant to be taken or changed? What if we witnessed not disappearance, but transformation? Project Halcyon was never a failure. It was an echo, one we still haven't understood. We reach for the stars, but sometimes the stars reach back. In my next transmission, I'll share what we found beneath the Martian monolith. And the 3 words carved into its base: end transmission, even echoes have origins, and I intend to find them.